Kevin Martin here, your UT admissions guide. In this workshop, I've recreated and reproduced with permission a real UT Austin student application, and I want to walk you through what an admissions reviewer might be thinking as they're reading and trying to assess which admissions score to assign this applicant. We'll look at the essays and the resume and discuss the results at the end. I hope you enjoy this video. Today I'm doing an application review workshop where I've recreated and anonymized a real student's application, including their essays and resume, and I will share with you what an admissions reviewer might be perceiving as they read and try to assess and score this applicant on the scale of 1 to 6 for their Personal Achievement Index admissions reviewer score. The first thing your reviewer is going to look for is signs of any adversity, but in this student there don't seem to be any because they come from a college-educated family, upper middle income, and they attend a resource-rich high school. So there's not any signs here that they're a first-generation college student from a low-income family or from a rural environment, for example. So let's take a look at their majors. So their first-choice major is the Macomb School of Business, and they're also applying for honors with Plan 2. So we will discuss the regular admissions essays, and then I'll share the Plan 2 essay as well. So they rank in the top 13% of their high school, and they've actually scored extremely well on the SAT with the 1560, leading to a very solid academic index of a 3.54. They've also taken a range of AP courses that are both STEM and humanities, and so academically the student is very strong, and given that they're not guaranteed their first choice major of business because they're not in the top 6%, and everybody has to compete for those spaces in their first choice majors, this student's resume and essays and review score are critically important because the academics are half, and then the score that they receive on their application represents the other 50% of the admissions criteria. So let's take a look at their expanded resume. So immediately we see they're doing a ton of stuff with band and various musical commitments, playing the flute. And so they made it as a drum major at a large high school, and so that's the highest accomplishment, individual accomplishment or leadership position that a student could get up to. So they've obviously demonstrated a high level of commitment in band, and especially getting it both junior and senior year. That's fairly rare, and so you can immediately see here that they're very dedicated to their teammates and also their high school's band. Obviously starting in 9th grade and then continuing through to senior year, qualifying an area and having a number of different individual accomplishments as well. So they're clearly a capable musician, playing in a couple different ensembles and symphonies. And so we're getting a picture right away that they've demonstrated a deep commitment in band. It's also notable that they founded their school's Spanish club, and if we recall, the student is white, and so Spanish is not their first language, or presumably one that's spoken at home, and so that's a pretty neat thing to do as well. Also, having done it their sophomore year, demonstrates that they have an interest in Spanish, and probably just wanted to get together with like-minded people. So they have two different jobs. One is at a kind of color or like a paint studio for artists or even amateur people to come and create their work, but then also they have a job at Starbucks, and so we'll remember these and table especially the Starbucks job for when we get to the essays. So they have a number of different awards and achievements. They've got a couple different classroom awards, but what sticks out here is VASE competition. So VASE is one of the biggest visual arts competitions in the state of Texas, and so they've had a variety of different awards that they've won at the area, region, and then at the state level as well. So in addition to being a very capable musician, they seem to be a great visual artist as well, and so let's also table that. And for when we get to the essays, they've also showcased a lot of their work, and rounding it out here with a number of different volunteering activities and also volunteering as part of their honor society commitments. And so we've got a very well-rounded student here with two deep commitments in both the musical and the visual, performing in the visual arts. So the resume right away is quite impressive, so we'll see what happens with the essays. So I think this SAA might be one worth pausing this YouTube video so you can read it in detail, because I think it's really an outstanding example of an essay that
traces their development over time, becoming an artist who, is beginning with, a lot of us with crayons and Crayola markers and kind of coloring on anything that they can find, and sharing a nice anecdote from their art class in second grade where they bent the rules and did something a little bit different. And when we're talking about Plan 2 admissions, Plan 2 is looking for unorthodox or unconventional students. And certainly if you're, defying authority a little bit, starting in elementary school, that's something that, may demonstrate some level of unorthodoxy or nonconformity in high school as well. So we're seeing early on that this is a student that has courage and isn't afraid to take some chances. She then shifts gears to talking about how junior year her best friend left classes or left their school, and it was really an understandably very difficult time for them. And they speak openly and honestly about how they began to struggle with mental health issues and depression. And so that is a nice segue and transition and context for the painting that they eventually won, or they eventually chose to compete at vase competitions. So this is a fantastic example of how on the resume it shows that they've won some competitions, but the context and journey circumstances around that achievement matter as much, if not more, than the actual accomplishment itself. And so they decided to use art as a form to express the blue and teal base feelings that they were experiencing. So it's definitely an experimental essay, and even talking about how they had reservations about even competing, because it is kind of a weird thing, and it's still, even in 2020, stigmatized to talk openly about mental health concerns. And so I think it's really neat that they not only are painting this picture, but then chose to compete. And then even during these competitions, she talks about how you have to do an interview, and it can be also a very intimidating process because, artists are people that know better than really any of us how easy it is to be misunderstood or have your painting or art or intention misinterpreted. And so, talking about this process, not just on the construction and, writing and painting of the piece itself, but then also the actual competition. So we have a lot of nuance here. And then it ends with a nice synthesis here about being unexpected, having unexpected, accomplishment of making it to regionals and then qualifying for state. And then there's a really nice concluding sentence here about how they have their piece prominently displayed at school as a reminder to classmates and teachers that we can transform dark and painful experiences into beautiful and inspiring works of art. So it's a super cool essay, and I think it's one worth pausing this video and reading in more detail, because it's an excellent example of a biographical linear story where they go from A to B to C, but then they weave in these personal elements and process-oriented themes and methods that are demonstrating they're very mature, thoughtful, sincere, and very fierce student is the kind of vibe that I feel whenever I read this essay. So what's interesting is she's talking about applying to the business school, and then she begins again talking about art again. And so we're shifting and pivoting from the visual arts and painting that she had done to fashion. And so we're getting something off the resume here, or that's outside of the resume, and talking about an additional interest. And UT actually has one of the top textiles and apparels or fashion merchandising programs in the United States, certainly outside of New York City, where, that's really the fashion hub of the United States. Talking about an influence in the family of how her dad's a CFO, and mom is a business executive. And and so she also talked about how she visited and sat in on a business law class talking about the Civil Rights Act. And so we have a clear mention of how they already have visited UT and how McCombs can be a perfect fit for them to provide them the business skill to be a potential fashion executive or even entrepreneur. And so we're seeing this connecting of the dots and across different domains. And so it's possible to demonstrate your interest in business without having a super business heavy resume about internships or ICDC DECA competitions and so on. So in leadership here, we have just a direct confrontation with their band experiences. And that's, fairly low hanging fruit because they begin their resume off with being a drum major and being in the various symphonies and ensembles. But they talked about, again, a little bit more on the context that there was some disagreement and lowering of the morale during her freshman sophomore year, having to, with regards to the upperclassmen who, there was kind of fracturing in the leadership, and she saw that as a vacuum that she could potentially field and fulfill, and sharing how she auditioned as a sophomore, and then needing to be a drum major under this new director that had left or entered in during their junior year. And so it was quite a potentially harrowing leadership experience. And so we're having a student that's having to encounter some adversity, both on the individual and on the team level, and how they're kind of rallying the troops, so to speak, to, write a different chapter in their school's band history. So I think this diversity short answer is super cool. So we went back and forth. I think with diversity, a lot of students, particularly if they're white, upper middle income, going to a suburban school, they'll say, like, I don't have anything that's diverse. I don't have any interesting experiences to share. And actually on our phone call, we talked, I was like, oh, tell me about your job at Starbucks, because she had just gotten off her shift and she was taking the Skype call at her Starbucks, and she begins to tell me about it, and she tells me about all these different regular customers that she meets, and how, you could predict their different orders. And, I was just curious about the experience. I've never worked at a coffee shop. And then I was like, well, why don't you write about this in an essay? I think it'd be really cool. Like, a lot of us go to coffee shops. A lot of us go to Starbucks. I'm sure her admissions reviewer probably drinks coffee, probably goes to Starbucks. So I'm like, why don't you just share a little bit about that? And this is the essay that came out. And it was actually really, really fun to write. I could tell with this essay, she was having definitely the most fun out of the four, particularly with essay A, that was, very dark and brooding, and a confrontation with mental illness. And this is kind of a light balance and counterbalance to that essay A, and even talking about people's personality traits based on their drink choice. And it's just a really fun essay, and again demonstrates a level of maturity, taking interest in others, showing that they're a young adult that can have communications with other people and talk about adult themes like relationships. So yeah, I think it's just a super cool essay. And again, your college essays don't need to be these, these grand gestures. It can just be telling a nice story, like the example of here at Starbucks. So recall in her first choice major that she was talking about her interest in potentially being a fashion executive. So I think it's a strategic choice for her Plan 2 essay to talk about fast fashion retailers like Forever 21 and H&M, and how there's an ecological cost to producing and then discarding clothes seasonally, and talking about the working conditions in many of these factories in the developing and tropical world, and how there's a big disparity between the amount that the workers are paid and the eventual cost of some of these clothes. So it's a very straightforward response to this topic. But I think the third paragraph is what's strongest here, because with many students, they don't fully answer the prompt, because the prompt asks you to discuss an issue of importance and how a Plan 2 education can help you explore these themes. And so she does an excellent job going into the specific curriculum of Plan 2, where you have to take a non-U.S. history course, where I even took courses like that at UT Austin. I took two, for example, about the continent of Africa and relations with North America, and we discussed colonialism and, what 21st century capitalism looks like. And so she's done a really nice job of a balanced essay about identifying a problem and then discussing how Plan 2 can help them achieve their goals and explore their interests. So these 5 sentences can sometimes be really hit and miss. There's one piece of information that we didn't hear in the essay A about her visual art experience and development, that she was self-taught and didn't take a formal class until sophomore year, which makes that accomplishment and her work even more impressive. And yeah, just some nice sentences here about her favorite movies and cinematography styles. And yeah, this one's pretty crazy. I lived in 16 different houses in the same city with my mom after a divorce. So yeah, this is a great example of 5 very different sentences that are adding some new dimensions and pieces to her Plan 2 application. And Plan 2, again, is looking for these quirky, multidimensional, curious, passionate students. And I'll say one more thing about these essays. So the student and the father and I went back and forth a lot. Before we were working together, I think the dad had some strong ideas of what this student's essay should look like. They should be very straightforward and logical and linear, and honestly, like really kind of dad type of essays. Like the dad is an accountant, and he was expecting his daughter, who's obviously not in this kind of mode of self-expression, that they're artists and they're a musician. And I kind of nudged the daughter to just experiment and try. So many of these essays, especially essay A, went through probably 5 or 6 different versions. I just said, hey, let's just try it. If it works, if it doesn't work, no problem. We can try again. If we need to throw out an essay, we can throw out an essay. And I think at the end of it, it was actually really cool to see the dad kind of put the daughter in the driver's seat and take a step back and just trust that she was putting forward her most authentic essays and very sincere. Like the first essays I had seen were just, you could see they were really flat. They weren't very personable. They weren't charming. And like talking with her on Skype, I'm like, wow, this is like a super interesting, thoughtful, young adult. And it was a shame early on that wasn't coming out. And so I thought it was really cool that the dad had the humility to let his daughter just, let the paintbrush flow and see what comes out. And so I think this, pretty experimental approach worked out really well. I've already shared about why this is a very strong application. The essays are intelligent, they're thoughtful, talking about art in a very nuanced way, both as a form of introspection, self-expression, social change with regards to raising awareness for mental health concerns and depression. A lot of the short answers are working well together, including the Plan 2 essay. And so it's a super strong application. But even so, the academics were, outside the top 6%, obviously scored extremely well on the SAT. And, I think we were pretty shocked at how well the results came out. So definitely not a 1, 2, or 3. I think there's not much of a chance of getting a 4. Because they have 2 different state level experiences with band and with art, and they're a drum major, and so they're clearly a leader. They've got just on the resume merits alone, it's a pretty easy 5. But I think the essays definitely elevate this potentially to a 6, where they've maximized the resources in their environment and demonstrated a really exceptional acuity for observation and their own self-awareness. I think in practice they probably got a 5.5. Where one reviewer probably scored a 6, the other one probably gave her a 5. And the reason I think that is because they were admitted early to Macombs. And even Plan 2, I think, was really a shock and a surprise, because Plan 2 does look for those quirky students. They do place a heavy emphasis on the essays, but it's pretty rare to get in if you're outside the top 5%. But I think the test score definitely helped her in her favor. And, to really get that Plan 2 admission even early, despite not being in the top 10%, I think is a testament to the students' courage to be experimental in their essays. And it wasn't too surprising that they didn't get a business honors program interview. Recall that business honors, the average admitted student comes from the top 2% and is scoring, around a 1550 on the SAT. And so not a surprise or a disappointment there, but this was certainly a win here in the admissions column, and I'm super thankful that it worked out for the student, that they heard back early and were able to enjoy the following months without the stress of waiting for their college admissions decision.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a comment and subscribe to my YouTube channel. You can find more helpful information at texadmissions.com/blog. And in the information section of this video, I provide links to a free online email consultation if you're interested in potentially working together, and links to my book, Your Ticket to the 40 Acres, and my premium course, Getting into Texas Universities. Thanks, and I hope to see you again soon.